The entire airport seemed to move in perfect rhythm, with rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, hurried footsteps, and cheerful reunions filling every corner. Yet in the middle of that endless crowd, one man stood completely still. His expensive black suit, polished shoes, and calm expression made him look like someone who owned half the city, but his trembling hands told another story. A single tear escaped his eyes before he could stop it, falling silently onto the boarding pass he held. At that exact moment, a tiny voice beside him asked a question that froze his world. Are grown-ups allowed to cry in public? The little girl looked up at him with innocent curiosity, holding a small stuffed rabbit close to her chest. Her question was so simple, yet it shattered every wall he had built around his heart. Before we continue this unforgettable journey, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in kindness and second chances, and subscribe to channel name. Your support helps bring more heartfelt stories like this to life. The man was Alaric Vaughn, one of the youngest CEOs in the country. Newspapers called him a business genius. Television hosts admired his discipline. Investors trusted every decision he made. But none of them knew the truth hidden behind the headlines. 1 year earlier, his wife Mireya had died unexpectedly after a sudden illness that doctors failed to stop. Since that day, Alaric had buried himself in work, convincing himself that success was easier to carry than grief. His office became his home, meetings replaced conversations, and silence became his closest companion. People respected him, but no one truly knew him anymore. His private jet, luxury penthouse, and billion-dollar company could not fill the empty chair waiting for someone who would never return. The airport held painful memories. It had been the last place he had hugged Mireya before she boarded a charity mission overseas. She had smiled, promised to return in a week, and kissed his forehead. She never came home alive. Every announcement echoing through the terminal reminded him of that final goodbye. For months he had avoided airports completely, sending executives in his place. But today he had no choice. His company was negotiating a life-changing humanitarian project overseas, something Mireya herself had dreamed of supporting before her death. The little girl who had spoken to him was named Eloan. She could not have been older than 7. Her curly hair bounced every time she moved, and despite her tiny size, she carried herself with surprising confidence. Beside her sat her grandmother, quietly organizing travel documents while watching the child with gentle eyes. Eloan waited patiently for an answer. Alaric realized nobody had asked him an honest question in a very long time. Most people only asked about profits, contracts, investments, or stock prices. This child simply wanted to know whether adults were allowed to cry. He slowly wiped his face and forced a weak smile. He admitted that sometimes they forgot they were allowed. The little girl nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. She explained that when she cried after losing her pet rabbit, everyone hugged her. But when she saw adults cry, they usually turned away or pretended they were fine. She wondered why sadness had different rules depending on someone's age. Her innocent observation reached places inside Alaric's heart that years of therapy and endless work had never touched. As boarding delays were announced because of heavy weather, passengers settled into uncomfortable waiting. Time seemed to slow down. Eloan began coloring pictures in a small notebook. She noticed Alaric sitting alone and asked if he wanted to color too because she believed nobody should sit alone while waiting. At first he almost laughed at the idea. A billionaire CEO holding crayons beside a child would look ridiculous. But something inside him whispered that perhaps ridiculous moments were exactly what his broken soul needed. She handed him a blue crayon and asked him to draw the happiest memory he could remember. His hand hesitated for several seconds before it finally moved. Instead of buildings or business logos, he drew a simple beach with 2 tiny figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. It was clumsy, childish, and far from perfect. Eloan smiled brightly and declared it beautiful because happiness never needed perfect lines. Her grandmother quietly apologized for her granddaughter's curiosity, but Alaric shook his head. For the first time in months, he felt something lighter than grief. The old woman introduced herself as Nora, explaining they were traveling to visit Eloan's mother, a nurse working overseas in a refugee camp. Eloan had not seen her mother in almost a year because she had dedicated herself to helping families affected by war. Alaric listened carefully. Mireia had once spoken passionately about supporting those same humanitarian missions. The coincidence unsettled him deeply. As the conversation continued, Eloan suddenly noticed the wedding ring still resting on Alaric's finger. She gently asked if his wife was waiting for him somewhere. The question struck harder than any business failure ever could. His eyes filled again before he quietly admitted that she was waiting somewhere he could not yet reach. Eloan became unusually silent. After several moments she removed a tiny paper heart from her coloring book and placed it into his hand. She explained that whenever she missed someone, she imagined love traveling farther than airplanes ever could. Paper hearts, she believed, reminded lonely people they were never completely alone. Alaric stared at that tiny folded heart as though it were the most valuable object he had ever held. Hours later, the storm outside intensified, canceling every departing flight. Hundreds of frustrated travelers complained loudly, but Alaric hardly noticed. Instead, he found himself helping Eloan build paper airplanes from unused magazines. Other children nearby slowly joined them. Soon laughter echoed through the waiting area. Parents smiled as strangers encouraged one another. Without realizing it, Alaric had done something he had not done since Mireia died. He had laughed. It was quiet, brief, and almost unfamiliar, but it was real. Watching from a distance, Nora gently told him something he would never forget. She said grief was like carrying a heavy suitcase. It never completely disappeared, but kindness from strangers made it lighter for a little while. Alaric silently thanked her. Those words settled into his heart more deeply than any motivational speech he had ever heard. When flights resumed the following morning, fate placed them on the same aircraft. During the journey, Eloan insisted he sit beside her because she wanted someone brave enough to hold her hand during turbulence. Ironically, she ended up calming him instead. Every cloud outside the window reminded him that storms eventually ended, even when they felt endless from the ground. After landing overseas, their paths separated. Before leaving, Eloan hugged him tightly and whispered that she hoped he would remember adults were allowed to cry too. She disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind only a wave and the memory of extraordinary kindness. Months passed. Back home, Alaric could not stop thinking about that little girl. Instead of returning completely to his old routine, he began changing his company. He launched employee mental health programs, expanded charitable foundations, and invested millions into hospitals and humanitarian projects that had once existed only in Mireia's dreams. Every decision was guided by one simple question. Would this make someone's invisible burden a little lighter? His board members were shocked by the transformation. Investors initially worried charity would reduce profits. Instead, something remarkable happened. Employees became more loyal. Communities supported the company. Customers admired its compassion. Success continued growing, but this time it carried purpose instead of emptiness. One afternoon, while reviewing applications for community grants, Alaric recognized a familiar name. Eloan's mother had submitted a proposal requesting medical supplies for the refugee clinic where she worked. Without hesitation, he personally approved the funding and doubled the requested amount. He included a handwritten note thanking her daughter for reminding one lonely man how to live again. Several months later, he received an invitation to the clinic's opening ceremony. Unsure whether he should attend, he remembered the paper heart still resting safely inside his wallet. It had become his quiet reminder that healing often began with the smallest acts of kindness. He accepted. When he arrived, children were playing outside the newly expanded medical center. Volunteers welcomed families with smiles instead of fear. Eloane spotted him instantly and ran across the courtyard faster than anyone could stop her. She hugged him tightly, laughing with the same joyful spirit he remembered from the airport. Her mother thanked him through grateful tears, explaining that hundreds of families now had access to medical care because of his generosity. Alaric looked around the clinic and quietly realized something extraordinary. This was not simply his donation. It was the continuation of Mireya's unfinished dream. That evening he walked alone beneath the setting sun. Instead of asking why life had taken so much from him, he silently thanked it for giving him one unexpected encounter that changed everything. He finally understood grief was not something to defeat. It was love with nowhere to go until kindness gave it a new direction. If this story is touching your heart, please pause for a moment to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, share it with someone who may need hope today, and subscribe to channel name. Your support allows more inspiring stories of compassion and healing to reach people around the world. Special request: before this story ends, please comment below with the words, "Kindness changes lives," if you believe even one small act of compassion can completely transform someone's future. Years later, travelers passing through that same airport would sometimes notice a quiet reading corner built especially for children waiting on delayed flights. On the wall hung a simple plaque dedicated to the memory of Mireya Vaughn and inspired by the kindness of one little girl who asked a question no executive, therapist, or newspaper had ever dared ask. Every child who visited received a small folded paper heart to keep. Most people smiled without understanding its meaning. But Alaric always knew. Whenever life became overwhelming, he would hold one of those paper hearts and remember that the strongest people were never those who hid their tears. They were the ones brave enough to let those tears become compassion for someone else. And somewhere in the endless movement of another busy airport, another lonely soul would one day discover that healing often arrives not through grand miracles, but through the innocent words of a child who simply wanted to know whether grown-ups were allowed to cry in public. From that day forward, Alaric never hid his tears again, because he finally understood they were not signs of weakness. They were proof that love had survived loss, and that even the deepest heartbreak could become the beginning of someone else's hope.